Welcome, dear friends. Good evening. Thank you for joining us here in your group Gnosis, Arizona. And we continue today with our many conversations on the magic of the runes. It so happens that tonight we're covering the topic on the magic of the rune Thorn. And maybe these two characters that you're seeing on the screen may not be too familiar to you. Let us take a moment so that you can get familiarized with this story because there's some beautiful mystery behind it. On the left-hand side, what you see is Thor. Thor is the god of thunder and protector of humanity. Thor is characterized because of his unrelenting strength, and his weapon is a hammer, a mighty hammer that only he can lift. On the right-hand side, what we see is a creature of name Jormungandr. Jormungandr is a massive serpent that is the offspring of Loki, Thor's brother, a trickster, and the giantess Angerboda. It so happens that Odin, the father of Thor, casted Jormungandr into the sea that was surrounding the Midgard, that was the earth. And there, Jormungandr grew so large that it was capable of encircling the entire world and even bite its own tail. And so, this is why Jormungandr is known as the world serpent. Thor and Jormungandr, through their epic stories, they have several confrontations, and in one of them, Thor attempted to catch this serpent while he was fishing with a giant of name Hymir. What Thor decided to do was to use as bait an ox's head. He tosses that ox's head into the water, and he starts luring Jormungandr, and eventually the serpent bit. Once Thor was able to hook it, he starts dragging it and he brings it to the surface. And at the moment that he was getting ready to strike the serpent with his mighty hammer, the giant Hymir panicked. In his fear, he cut the line and he set Jormungandr free, leading the serpent then to go once again deep into the waters, to be once again hiding, concealed within the darkness. But what happens? There is a final battle between Thor and Jormungandr, and this is a battle that takes place at Ragnarok. During Ragnarok, these two come across their final confrontation. In their epic battle, Thor finishes the serpent by striking it with his powerful hammer, and he delivered such a mighty blow that he shattered the serpent to pieces. But even though Thor was victorious, the moment that Jormungandr got shattered, it released a torrent of poison. And this serpent released poison as it died. And again, even though Thor was victorious, Thor took 9 steps. He came in contact with this poison and he succumbed to it. Eventually, Thor died. Dear friends, whenever you hear this number 9 in these epic stories of gods and titans and giants, we want to invite you to always think about the work in the ninth sphere. To always consider that the 9 is associated with the mysteries of supersexuality, and that this has to do with the work that Samael refers to as the work in the flaming forge of Vulcan, the work in the abode of Pluto. Because with this known and understanding that this number 9 stands for the mysteries of the super dynamics of love, we can then see how is it that Thor as a mighty one fell by a serpent, which is the same pleromatic fall that we see in the Garden of Eden between Adam and Eve as they get tricked by the serpent and consume the forbidden fruit. So let me tell you a little bit about this rune Thorn, that is a rune of willpower. Dorn comes from a Proto-Germanic word, durisas, that means giant or thorn. This force gives you protection from harm. The powers of this rune give you the ability to ward off any threats. It gives you the power to overcome obstacles, tests of strength, any tests of inner character, issues of inner conflicts. You can overcome all of them with the power of this rune, with willpower. And that is something that we must expect, because when we apply willpower into living a life of right thought, right action, and right sentiment, well, certainly we remain very well protected. We say this because there are many students at many different levels, whether it is the public chamber, the intermediate, or maybe some students in the second chamber, who seem to have some fascination with constantly being under the threat of the attacks of black magicians and witches and sorcerers and dark arts. And perhaps it is because they have not heard yet that Samael clearly states that there is no greater protection than having a tranquil heart. And friends, for us, we cannot have a tranquil heart if it is not in any other way than applying willpower and making an effort to again live a life of right action, right thought, right sentiment, right service for humanity. The right willpower to initiate and perform the inner work. So how can we get the benefits from this rune? How can we use of these cosmic forces so that we can nourish our willpower into something superior? Well, Dr. Arnold Kromheller, master of Viracocha, explains so in his book, Curso de Runas, or The Course on Runes. He starts by saying that there is an astrological correspondence between the rune Thorn, or Dorn, and the constellation of Libra. As you would imagine, Libra, as a symbol of the law, is intimately associated with karma, law of cause and effect. Certainly, the right willpower will invite the right actions, the right causes, and the effects will indeed be exceedingly favorable. Viracocha states that in this rune, one, the practitioner, begins to work with the left sector of the body. He says that's of the personality. But Samael takes this teaching and he expands on it, and he lets us know, remember, there is no future for the personality. The personality will perish at the graveyard when the physical body expires and is consumed by and degraded. He says that we can make use of these powers, but for the consciousness, so that we can build within us Christ's will, the same degree of willpower of the master of masters. So what does Viracocha say? He says the left arm touches the waist, but it is not the left arm, because we're going to be replicating with our body the shape of this rune, and this is equivalent to a Latin D. We will use our right arm, but nevertheless, he says, without the thorn that pricks and hurts, there is no spark, no outbreak of light emerges. Samael says the same thing with different words. Samael says, if it is not 100 degrees, water will not boil. And that implies that man must go through adversity so that we can demonstrate if indeed the inner mastery exists. So what does Viracocha say about this rune? He says, as you assume this posture, in the morning, you will sing the syllabic, the mantric syllables, ta, te, ti, to, tu, and you will sing that sequence 7 times. But let's look at what Samael says. Because Samael says, since ancient times, the descent into the ninth sphere has been the maximum ordeal for the supreme dignity of the Hierophant. Buddha, Jesus, Dante, Hermes, Krishna, Quetzalcoatl, they had to descend into the abode of Pluto. For our purposes today, we will look at Jesus and Quetzalcoatl. Jesus, Christified, and Quetzalcoatl as that Christified being among the Aztecs. We see the descent of Jesus into the Averno in the writings of the Apostle Matthew. And Matthew makes a comparison between Jonah and Jesus. He says, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. We know from the writings in the Gospels that after the crucifixion, as Jesus was taken down from the cross, and he spent those 3.5 ensuing days with his body in the grave, well, he took of that time and he descended into those spheres of hell as part of that great work of those ordeals that those masters must complete. But even in our level of development, each and every one of us must descend into their individual and particular averno. Each one of us must make the effort of developing something that is known as the memory of the esoteric work. And that memory of the esoteric work comes only as a fruit of the exercise of retrospection. That means that every day we should make an effort. We should exercise that superior willpower so that we can go back and revisit all of the events that took place during the day. Because when we do that, we start bringing the light of the consciousness into those things that we were not paying attention at first. We start making the unconscious conscious. And with that light of the consciousness, we become more able to see and perceive our own individual defects. We can observe them, comprehend them, and then invoke of the power of our Divine Mother to see them eliminated. It takes courage to go back during the day and revisit those difficult circumstances, those difficult moments of crucial conversations, those instances that as we look back, we may cringe a little. It requires of that willpower, of that force to be able to see them again and to extract value from these particular events. Quetzalcoatl, as a Christified being among the Aztecs, he also descended into the spheres of hell. And in the stories that are written in the sacred scriptures, Quetzalcoatl descends with the purpose of course, symbolic, retrieving the bones of his ancestors so that he could enable once again the creation to continue flourishing. So Samael says to this effect, to descend into those mineral regions of the earth, into that subworld, is extremely easy. But to ascend again, to return up to the light of the sun, is frightfully difficult. It is almost impossible. And we must all develop the necessary willpower, the Christ willpower, to be able to effect such a great internal work. And that means we must willingly embrace with gratitude and with gratefulness all of the difficult circumstances of life. We see the expression of the Rune THORN in the sacred writings of the Aztec, and what you're seeing here on the screen is just a very minuscule fragment from the Borgia Codex. On the right-hand side, we see the god Cinteotl. On the left-hand side, we see the god Zipactonal. Cinteotl is known as the Aztec god of corn. And as that god, he is the one who has power over the sustenance of life. He is the one who has power over the solar seeds, those solar seeds that we have been granted, that are known to exist in our intellect, in our emotion, in our instincts, within our sexuality, within our habits. Solar seeds that if we tend to them correctly, they will sprout as beautiful flowers in the garden of the Lord. These flowers would be symbols of virtues, powers, attributes, abilities of the being. And all of these things together are exactly what constitutes a solar soul. So here we see Cinteotl opening the eyes of the practitioner with a thorn of agave. This is known as the thorn of sacrifice. And the secret meaning behind this is it may be painful to open your eyes and see, but to be able to realize this internal work, it is absolutely necessary. On the left-hand side of the image of Cinteotl, we see that there is a blade of obsidian. And that blade of obsidian that is so sharp reminds us of the teaching of Samael when he tells us that we must bring the scalpel of self-judgment into our internal exercise so that we can dissect our psychological aggregates and truly understand them. And so here we see a very sharp blade of obsidian, but it is adorned with a flower. The beauty that emerges from the inner work. On the left-hand side, we have Zipactonal. And Zipactonal is the Aztec god of time, astrology, and divination. Of course, as the god of time, it speaks of rhythm. It speaks of flow, days and nights, sequences of events one after the other and bound together, and of course, logical sequence. And so Zipactonal also opens the eyes of the practitioner because there is a need to make of our life an offering to our being. And this is why we see on the left-hand side an incense burner with smoke. In that incense burner, there is copal, there is frankincense, and there is incense that burns as an offering to our innermost. All of this work requires of willpower. And the greatest expression of willpower, we see it in the great sacrifice of the master of all masters. What we see here on the screen is the image of Veronica. And Veronica is holding on to this veil, this mantle, that she used to dry the sweat and to clean the blood from the face of the master as he was walking carrying the cross. The miracle states that as she cleansed his face, the imprint of the face of the master remained there in the veil of Veronica. What we see here with the crown of thorns is nothing more than Christic willpower. So Samael tells us, in these sacred mysteries of the thorn cult, special practices were given to develop conscious will. And this practice of the rune thorn helps us develop the conscious will. So what do? Samael says, stand tall on your feet and you face east. You will have your right arm bent and your hand is going to rest comfortably on your waist or on your hip. And here, assuming this posture of the rune thorn, we will chant the mantric syllables ta, te, ti, to, tu by extending the vowel sound and by dedicating a complete breath, a complete exhalation into the singing of each one of these mantric syllables. As we perform this exercise, we must ask our innermost to help us develop the Christic will within our consciousness. So how does this sound? Something like this. Da, de, And so we can repeat that cycle of mantric syllables 7 times, as Master Viracocha recommends, or we can do this practice for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And if you can do it for longer, then even better. And it is with this practice of the rune thorn that we start developing, strengthening, maximizing that willpower of the consciousness, that force of the Christic will. So dear friends, this is all we had to share with you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the magic of the runes, and we have covered today the rune thorn. Thank you everyone for joining us, and may all beings be happy.